There's a story about evil spirits taking on the forms of Scarecrows and killing every pony on a farm. But you're too young for that, Applebloom, Applejack said as she walked back to her tent in the forest by Sweet Apple Acres. Old enough for Applejack. I even have my own tent here in the Every Forest. And there's all kinds of evil creatures in it. Applebloom pleaded with her sister. The two ponies had decided to camp out in the forest after Big Mac had invited a bunch of hardcore hoofball players to the farm for a rough weekend of training, which would include the bucking of apple trees and shucking corn from the fields. He had called it the patented Big Mac Farm Stallion Workout. Applejack didn't want to have 20 stallions hitting on her all weekend, so she decided to leave, and Applebloom had mentioned the Everfree Forest. Applejack, not wanting to be outdone by her little sister, had accepted the challenge to stay the whole weekend in the forest. A twig snapped as she stepped down, and she felt a weight come upon her back. "Now what about you being fearless and all?" AJ asked as she shoved Applebloom off her back to the ground. Her sister rolled over to her hooves and shot back up. "What do you mean? I meant to do that," Applebloom said as she put up her best cool face. AJ shook her head and started to walk back to her tent. Okay, I'm a little scared. Could we just call it a night and go back to the treehouse instead?" Applebloom said as another twig snapped. "I guess so, Applebloom. Let's get these tents torn down," AJ said with a quiet chuckle. Applebloom took down the tents with a speed that would make Pinkie Pie jealous. "All done, let's go," Applebloom said quickly as she strapped her tent into her saddlebag. The two sisters began to walk back to the farm, where the treehouse was located. As they passed one of the cornfields by the farm that had not been taken down, Applebloom went pale as a ghost. "What's wrong, Applebloom? You look like you've just seen a ghost," Applejack asked as she walked by the field. "There were red eyes staring at me from the cornfield, sis," Applebloom squeaked out as she cowered by her sister. "Aw, shucks. You're just seeing things." Applejack started, but watched as two red beams looked towards her from the corn. Watching, without blinking, without emotion. Applejack began to back away slowly, her eyes fixed upon the two staring back at her. She began to shake with fear as the eyes began to move up and down, as if they were moving with her body towards them. "Let's get moving and hope they don't follow us," she whispered, as she picked up her speed to a trot. They could hear a noise like a scythe being dragged across the ground as they hurried to the farmhouse. Then they began to hear the screams, a banshee or something worse, the headless horse. They began to full-out run, and screams grew louder, and another seemed to join in, calling to the other. "Faster, Applebloom! Blaster! Come on, sis, run! We gotta get back to the house!" Applejack yelled with a touch of fear in her voice as she ran. Applebloom began to fall behind her as her legs were shorter. "I'm running as fast as I can, sis! It's gonna get me!" Applebloom screamed in terror as she ran as fast as her small legs could take her. Just then, one of the screams ended in a "yoop," and Applejack stopped dead in her tracks. "Big Mac, what in the hell are you doing?" Applejack screamed at the top of her lungs. "Just want to scare you, sis," the big red stallion said, taking off a mask with glowing eyes. "I knew you wouldn't resist coming back home, so I thought I would scare you," he said shyly. "Do you know what you did to us, Big Mac? You nearly gave Applebloom a heart attack!" Applejack screamed as she trotted to Big Mac, sucking him right in the jaw. "And where are your friends hiding in the field calling back to you?" she screamed again. "Oh, I deserved that one. And they already went home, why?" Big Mac said as he rubbed his throbbing jaw. Then who was calling back to you? Applejack asked, just above a whisper. Another scream was heard from the field, this time alone and far away. The three ponies jumped and turned to see glowing red eyes staring at them from the center of the field, where the Scarecrows were located. They screamed in unison and ran for the house. The scream of the first was answered by another, and that by a third. 3 screams resound as the Scarecrows begin their hunt. The 3 siblings reached the front of the door of the farmhouse and threw it open with deadly force. The noise woke up the elderly pony sleeping in her rocking chair in the living room. "What? Who's there?" came the distinct voice of Granny Smith. "Granny, there's something in the cornfield, something with glowing red eyes and a scream like a banshee," AJ said, terrified, to her grandmother. She was shaking to the bone with fear, and her teeth chattered even though she kept her mouth clenched shut. "It chased us back here to the house. None of you thought to lock the door," Granny said as she listened to their story. "I tell you, you young'uns do come out with some whoopers," she said as she got up slowly and hobbled to the kitchen as the 3 ponies locked up in fear. Granny ran into something hard, but soft at the same time. She looked up to see what appeared to be a pony scarecrow. "Oh, you were telling the truth," she said softly. The Scarecrow reached out and grabbed Granny by her hair and began to drag her away. Granny began to kick and hit the Scarecrow as it moved, and it took the other hoop and snapped her neck. Applejack winced as she heard the bones of the old mare's neck crunch and snap, bending the pony's neck to an awkward angle. Applebloom screamed as she heard her grandmare's body went limp. The Scarecrow began to walk back out of the house, towards the corn. They turned around to see another one standing behind them. Big Mac kicked the Scarecrow as hard as he could and hit it right in its gut. It was thrown backwards into the wall where a family picture of the Apple family fell onto the Scarecrow and shattered. They pulled a large shard of glass out of its neck, and blood as black as night and thick as molasses began to flow from the wound. It stood up and began to walk slowly towards them. Big Mac readied himself again for a kick as the 2 fillies ran out of the house. He went to kick again, but the Scarecrow swung the glass shard deep into Big Mac's flank. He fell to the floor as the wound crippled him, and watched in terror as the Scarecrow removed the shard. The Scarecrow brought the shard up to Big Mac's neck, and the large stallion struggled to move away from the Scarecrow's death-tight grip. The Scarecrow then slowly moved the shard across the stallion's neck, cutting deep into his throat. He gargled as blood flowed freely from his jugular onto his red coat, and his body began to twitch as it suffocated from the lack of air and blood. The Scarecrow then picked up its prize and carried it out of the house into the cornfield. Applejack ran with her little sister out of the house and into the only place she could think of, the orchard. It was a terrible idea as the Scarecrow seemed to blend in with the trees. She would see one pass a tree behind her only to see another pass in front of her. The 2 began to run in circles, trying to get away from one Scarecrow only to fall into the grip of another. She heard a noise behind her and turned to see all 3 Scarecrows looking down at her and Applebloom. "Run, Applebloom! And whatever you hear, don't turn around and stop!" AJ said to her younger sister as she kept her eyes focused solely on the Scarecrows, trying to keep them still with her eyes. "But sis, they'll get you! But sis, they'll get you!" Applebloom said, tears falling from her cheeks. "Just run, Applebloom, and don't turn back till dawn," AJ said as the Scarecrows began to reach for Applejack. She fought back and another grabbed a hold of her legs. Apple Bloom did as she was told and ran as fast as she could. She heard the screams of her sister as they dragged her off to the cornfield. Apple Bloom had to save her sister. She stopped and turned around and ran towards the cornfield where the Scarecrows usually sat. She was surprised that they didn't chase her through the field. She ran further into the field, hearing only the muffled breath of her own body. Apple Bloom was horrified when she reached the middle of the field. Applejack was nailed to the center cross and began to cry as she saw Apple Bloom. "Why'd you come here, Apple Bloom?" AJ asked softly, her body convulsing with tears. "You fell right into their trap." The Scarecrows walked out from just behind the rows of corn. Each one had a large butcher knife, and they moved towards Apple Bloom, one step at a time. Step. Each step they took, they stopped. And with each step, Apple Bloom began to shrink down to the ground. Step. 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 They were right in front of her. The first one stabbed at Apple Bloom and missed, but the second struck her in her side, just behind her ribs, piercing the bottom of her lung. She screamed as the blade bit into her body. The third one raised its knife and plunged it deep into Apple Bloom's chest, slicing through her heart. Apple Bloom's eyes shot open and saw, instead of 3 scarecrows, a campfire. "You fell asleep, Apple Bloom. Come on. Let's go to sleep in the tents," Applejack said as she began to walk into the single tent in the backyard of the farmhouse. Apple Bloom heard Granny Smith holler goodnight from the house, and a dozen or so yeahs come from the barn. She walked into the tent with her sister, and just as she fell asleep, a pair of glowing red eyes began to shine from the corn, silently, impatiently waiting for the apples to go to sleep, so it could kill them all.